welcome to What's New with Cannabis in New York State. First of all, thank you for attending. My name is Mia Wolf. I'm going to be doing a little bit of an interview today with our sort of expert here, Mr. Mike Rallier. Mike Rallier, I don't know if people know this about him, he has over $1 billion worth of economic development experience over the various projects he's done. He has a lot of diverse experience with large-scale development, PR, crisis communications, as well as lobbying and strategic business development. We just absolutely love to have him here at SRC, but before he came with us, he was the president of the Luther Forest Technology Campus, as well as the president of the New York State Office of Science, Technology, and Academic Research.
Right.
Yes, well, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so I think I want to open with the idea that there are plenty of words being thrown around in this sort of cannabis space, right? So you've got cannabinoid hemp, right? You've got marijuana, all sorts of them. What are the difference between all these terms and which ones are the relevant ones?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It was fascinating as I prepared more for this webinar because there's so much that is unknown. And one of the very confusing things that I found was in the beginning is people interchange all these different words and we don't really know what we're talking about. So I was hoping to kind of clarify that for the folks here today, as well as for others who watch this in the future. But there's really three terms that are important: hemp, cannabinoid hemp, and marijuana. Marijuana is interchanged with cannabis a lot. Those two are the same. And I'll get into the definition because there is a regulatory and legal definition to what we're dealing with here. And it started with the Farm Bill changing the classification of hemp so that it was no longer considered marijuana. And there is a very specific definition to that. Hemp, hemp's definition is 0.3% less delta-9 THC in the hemp plant. And if it's less than 0.3%, then it's considered hemp and it's considered legal to grow and work with.
So that's hemp.
That's hemp. And that hemp contains 16 different cannabinoids, THC and CBD being the biggest two that are in there. That leads us to cannabinoid hemp. Cannabinoid hemp is really CBD. That's where we just process out the CBD. New York State's program is a cannabinoid hemp. They refer to it as a cannabinoid hemp program. Or I believe it's part 114 of the new laws that are regulations that have come out. So that if you hear cannabinoid hemp, think of it as CBD.
Okay.
And then you have marijuana. Marijuana can contain the 16 different cannabinoids that are in the cannabis plant and the marijuana plant. If they say marijuana generally or cannabis, generally they're referring to the higher levels of THC and the psychotropic type of effects that come out of with the different THCs that are out there. So just boil it down to three things: hemp, cannabinoid hemp, and marijuana / cannabis.
Brilliant. So we have this law in New York State. We've got to regulate sort of all these things. What have we seen so far?
So in New York, we've, hats off to the Office of Cannabis Management. In the last probably 2 months, they have really been at it. I think we've done a number of things in New York. One, if you haven't been to their website yet, there's a lot of very good information that has been populated on the website. But specifically what we've done in New York that we've been following is we've allowed, under Part 115, we've allowed both the personal home growth of marijuana plants. And I'm not going to go deep into the regs about how many you can have and all of that. You can look that up, or you can call us and we can help you kind of guide through that a little bit. But you have home cultivation for personal use. You also now have home cultivation for medical marijuana as well. Those are both part of 115 of the new regs that are out. We also have a little bit more detail on expungement of criminal records. They've given some guidance on that. That's expected to hit about 400,000 New Yorkers.
Wow.
I've seen stats across the country. It's hundreds of thousands of people in each state, that at least the states that I've been taking a look at. And then kind of the big piece that came out recently is there are new regs for the cannabinoid hemp program, the CBD program. They've basically taken it from the Department of Health, moved it over to the Office of Cannabis Management. There are regulations published. We'll talk about some of those regulations today, as well as kind of get into a few other things that are going on in the industry.
So what are we missing from that list that I think people are most interested in?
Well, really, there's some guidance that's on the website for that list, but I think the interesting thing is, let's take the cannabinoid hemp program. There's really couple of different programs. One, the law itself really breaks out and it sets up the office, sets up the medical marijuana, sets up the adult use marijuana, and then it gives a bunch of different detail on the processing and growing and the uses within those various pieces to that.
Sure.
So first we'll start, and we could go into the marijuana piece of it, but it's what's frustrating to me as a practitioner is in New York, we don't have the rules yet for adult use, for marijuana, for adult use recreation use. The regs are not there. So what we try to do is, instead of continually being on webinars and on series to say, oh, we don't know because the regs aren't there. We don't know because the regs aren't there. So we try to take a different approach today and said, okay, well, what do we know? And what we do know is the cannabinoid hemp program is out there. There's licensing fees. There are levels of restricted chemicals. They talk about different toxins that can go in it, different levels of toxins and pesticides and metals. And so there's a bunch that we can learn from the cannabinoid hemp program that will likely transfer over to some degree into the medical marijuana. For instance, we have a cannabinoid hemp, I'm just going to call it CH if I can. The CH retailer, like, CH processor, which is basically an extractor, and a CH manufacturing license. You can apply today for any of those licenses. The application fees are $300, $500, and $3,500, depending on what you want to do in there. They're not restrictive. The licensing fee generally are $1,000 per site. There's one that's $300 per site. So the fee structure tells us that it's not trying to restrict people from growing and processing CBD, hemp, CBD, which has, again, less than 0.3% THC in the plant itself. So you can get in there and you can really look through. They also are a number of permits they talk about, which would be handling of waste. You might need a permit if you just want to handle waste. If you just want to deliver product, you can get a permit. Those permits are about $100 a piece. So we're able to kind of see what that program is doing, again, because a lot of that's going to be transferred over. And here at SRC, what we really like about it is it allows us, it gives us time to look at, because we do so many SLA liquor licensing compliance issues here, that a lot of it is very similar in the application process. You have to walk through some very detailed portions of the application. You have to have good manufacturing practice, has to be verified. So how do you go out and get a GMP third-party verification? It's in there. So those are the types of things that we're used to doing here at SRC because we do it for liquor licensing. So, we're happy to help on the other side of that as these licenses and applications come together. Again, I can go through all of those different requirements, or you can just look them up, or you can just give us a call. It doesn't, we don't need to take the time up here today.
Well, I like this point because we sort of set out our store. If you have specific questions that you'd like to be asking during the webinar, please just enter them into the chat function at the bottom of the screen. It should say Q&A. You put it in there. We'll get it up here, and then we'll ask Mike. So to move on, you mentioned initially that not THC, a sort of limited amount of THC. I think you said 0.3% is legalized federally. What's happened since then?
So like any good entrepreneurial business, we figured out that Delta 9 was what was classified underneath the Farm Bill, being less than 0.3%. So which is also available in the state now, we figured out how to get Delta 8.
Okay.
So Delta 8 is another psychoactive, provides psychoactive effects, same type of THC. Delta 9 is the gold standard. That's the one we know most about, but we know not a ton about it, but we know most about Delta 9. Whereas Delta 8, we don't know all that much about it yet. But what we are told in the research that I've been doing and the community that I've been working in is that it's about Delta 8, it takes about 10 times more Delta 8 to hit the similar effects that you would get a THC type of high for Delta 9. So Delta 8 federally isn't necessarily regulated. And this really causes a problem. We'll talk more later about kind of some of the issues that are posed because of the way the federal regulations are working between the different agencies. But here in New York, the one thing that is different is that, for instance, I know firsthand that you can buy Delta 8 product, you can have it delivered to your home, you can buy it in various forms. Both you can smoke, you can buy it in the form that comes so that you can inhale it. And you can also buy the flowers, you can do what you want with it, and you can also have gummies with it as well. So Delta 8 is not considered CBD. It is a THC. Interesting here though, in New York, very specifically, which makes things very risky, is that I just told her that's available in New York. Under the regs, it's illegal in New York. Delta 8 and Delta 10, two of the cannabinoids that are in the hemp plant, are specifically outlined in the regulations as not being allowed in cannabinoid hemp, which is the CBD program. They will be allowed, or some version of them will be allowed in the marijuana business when that's legalized, or the regs come out. But for the CBD program, so as of right now, you still should not be able to sell any type of THC plant that has more than 0.3% THC. A lot of folks leave it at THC, but it's the federal level says Delta 9 THC. The state, through its regs now, says there's a bunch of different ones that we really don't want out there, and it is being regulated. And I can give you the specific source and site of that. Again, call right. We can figure that out.
Okay. So it sounds like when they were drafting these sort of CBD rules in New York State, they had a certain amount of scientific adeptness, but you also mentioned there's a lot we don't know about all these chemicals. What's going on there? How can we craft these rules if we don't know so much?
So the interesting thing, this is across the country, public policy and politics are far outpacing the science on this. So the marijuana plant absorbs whatever it's in. So nutrients and other chemicals that are in the dirt, it's very high absorbent type of the hemp plant. Has a high absorption rate. So it absorbs everything. So we know a little bit about Delta 9 and what it does to the two receptors that you have in your body. We know less about Delta 8, which is widely available, and what that does. But there are still 14 other cannabinoids that we don't really know anything about. And so as I've talked to researchers and listened to different folks that are out there talking about this, the research is done with pure CBD, pure cannabinoid oil, no toxins, no chemicals. It's pure. That's what research has done that. On the street, it's not pure. There are 67 different pesticides that are have levels that you cannot exceed under New York's law for it. If you get bugs on your plant and you want to kill them, and as soon as you hit them with a certain pesticide to kill them, you now added toxicity into that plant. There's a number of metals, there's a number of other biologics that can go into there. So what we're getting and growing at home or growing in facilities is not pure, clean CBD extraction or even THC extraction. There's a toxicity level. And that's why under New York law and under many of the other programs, that's why we test it. You want to know what's in there. My client in Massachusetts, he tested his first batch and he came back and he had been growing for some time, but they found arsenic in it. And both him and I were, oh boy, we're in trouble. We have arsenic. Well, it turns out arsenic is very common in the marijuana plant, depending on how it's grown. And so his goal there now is 0 toxins and get as pure as possible. And it's just difficult to do if you're not in a lab type situation. So there's a lot we don't know. So as the science goes, this is kind of what the point I think that we wanted to make was, when science starts to catch up, we're going to see a huge number of bills come into the legislatures across the country, especially in New York. We have no settled case law in New York on this, so there's no products liability, personal injury. We are a tort-loving state in New York, so we're going to continue to see lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit coming out to establish the law. So you're going to see a lot about that. You're going to see businesses come and go because as science goes, the regulatory structure is going to hit different limits. So we're going to see a number of businesses try to adapt to regulatory changes. This is going to be a fast-moving regulatory body of regs, and as they move, businesses are going to have to adapt. And for example, we talked about earlier, there's provisions within the law that allow the board to restrict certain levels of THC. It can restrict the type of THC, it can restrict certain levels of THC. So if you're coming in and you want to grow and you're proud of growing 70% pure THC,
Yes.
Delta 9, and New York says we're not allowing anything over 25%, and I don't know that they're doing that, not 25, it's a random number, but they're going to allow some number of pure, and that's going to cause problems within the business if you can't adapt to those things.
Sure. So how is that sort of risk structure setting up the market in the state?
So interesting, what we're seeing here on the risk side, so from the company side, we're seeing big growers who are going to just grow pure volume. Quality is not there. Quality is there, what they say counts, but it's about the volume. It's about the money and it's about the volume. And that, when you produce that volume, it goes into your edibles, your CBD, it goes into everything. It's growing the plant. So we're going to see they're growing volume. And when you grow volume, you tend to not have the best product that's out there. So that's what we're seeing now coming into New York. We're seeing the bigger growers who are well-financed setting up or preparing to set up these larger warehouses and factories. They're all around here. There's probably almost one in every county I've read in the last couple of weeks where these large grow facilities are coming in. They're banking on getting a license, which all indications they should be able to get a license to grow. We're not seeing the small guys are all sitting on the batch guys. I call this the Bud Light and the Coors Light beer makers versus the IPAs and the smaller brews. The batch guys are sitting off to the side because they don't know what the regs are yet. And they can't afford and don't want to put money into something that they're not aware of yet. The volume guys can do that. They'll just adapt their growth to that. They know what they need to put in there. So we're not really seeing that prep work being done at the smaller batch levels and good product levels. We're seeing it at the volume guys are preparing.
Okay. So we talked about the federal law, right? I think a lot of people are wondering, first, when is this just going to be descheduled? Like, why can't they change it in one sort of swift move?
I was on a webinar yesterday, and the practitioner said he's been working for 13 years and saying that next year was going to be the year that the feds legalized marijuana. Yesterday, he said, I have no idea. I've been doing this for 13 years. They're still not really any closer. The Farm Bill really was some of the gist of it. But you have the USDA who has changed the definition of marijuana so that we can have these hemp products now. But outside of that, it's still illegal at the federal level. One of the things in New York, which is very interesting to me, is that CBD, even though it's a hemp product under that definition at the federal level and under New York's regs, the FDA at the federal level doesn't want it as an additive, and it's not, you can put it in, you can put alcohol infused CBD or CBD infused alcohol. But what happens on that is if you claim that it's going to fix your back, technically that has not gone through the FDA rule process. So you can't put it into food, and you can't put it into drugs, and you can't put it into cosmetics unless you go through that FDA process. So they don't recognize it. But you see all this stuff is all around.
Yes.
CBD infused everything. So there's a lack of enforcement really at the federal level. There's not much going on in enforcing, but what the FDA is enforcing is if you make a claim that CBD does something for you, because again, the science isn't there. So if the CBD is claimed to help you with a hurt back, sore muscles, headache, acne, as soon as you claim CBD does something and you label your product with that claim, The FDA is trying to find those folks and take those folks and that business line out. They are allowing you to say CBD and how much CBD is in it. But because years ago, a couple of years ago, we had this issue where we had no idea what was going in the product. So the FDA stepped up enforcement. We've seen a lot of different enforcement at federal level between Obama, Trump, and Biden.
Yes.
It's kind of all over the map. Bottom line is, at the federal level, we still have a bunch of different agencies that interact with Schedule 1 drugs that are not allowed. I don't see the federal government backing off really quickly and all of a sudden saying marijuana is legal. What is happening, what seems to be the tone right now, and the tone changes given administrations, we're seeing okay, let the states do it.
Okay.
So is it going to be all or nothing at the federal level, or let the states do it? We back off and we're going to allow the states to dictate their own. That has its own problems.
Sure. So we actually have a question from people out in the audience that sort of gets to this issue of where the federal meets the state. And so the first part of the question is, right, so what are the issues with getting a bank loan? Could you get one now? And if you can't, how can that be resolved? And then two, should New York look into sort of setting up its own banking system for marijuana, like maybe a public bank?
Banks are interesting.
Yes.
According to my knowledge, there's at least a bank or banker or some type of financial institution in every state that deals with marijuana.
Okay.
How you find that particular institution, there's a lot of different associations that you can go to on the web and you can find out who it is in your particular state. I do not know who it is in New York, although I believe it's one of the credit unions. That's the top of my head. I can't recall which one.
But there's somebody.
There's somebody in New York that'll do that. Again, it's an enforcement thing. There are people who are taking that risk on. There are lots of different risks. It's a cash business. You can't put money in. There's IRS codes that don't allow you to take certain exemptions, business exemptions on it. So it's still a mess, I think. But as it's becoming across the board, as marijuana is becoming legal, you're seeing the lax enforcement of a lot of the banks up. Banks, though, are very slow-moving institutions. So you're not going to see all of a sudden the national banks of the world, or at least of the country, saying, okay, we all of a sudden do this. By the trial and error, you're going to probably see some smaller banks do it. Like I said, the small credit unions are doing it. It's still illegal at the federal level, but it's a chance that a lot of people are taking. Right now, a lot of it's being done by private money.
Okay. So you can find somebody dubious legality though.
Yes.
Okay. So what are some of the other business risks you're taking if you, for instance, put a lot of money into growing a particular strain?
Well, growing a strain is interesting. The genetics to the various seeds. Now, this isn't, I'm going to date myself, but this is not the marijuana that was around when I was a kid or my family was growing up in the 70s. That was 5–10% THC levels. Okay. Now, because we've gotten much smarter with genetics, we can now clone and make other materials or other plants that now produce 30–40–50% THC. So we are increasing the THC levels.
Sure. So
we're dealing with a lot, and this goes with some of the expungement and the social equity pieces of this. We're not dealing with marijuana. We're dealing with getting high.
Okay.
And we're dealing with how fast can we get high and how much do we want to smoke. There's that class. So there are some states, I think there are 6 states still in the US that don't have hemp approved laws. Even though at the federal level it's there. I know that South Dakota happens to be one of them. I was looking at that the other day. It's only about 6 of them.
Yes.
And it's just, there's a lot of risk to that. If a regulation gets changed, your business is at risk. And the regulation can affect THC levels. If the product, if for some reason, in the manufacturing process, we might change definitions within the manufacturing process. So I think there's a lot of just different inherent risks to business that are out there when something is unknown.
So you talk about a particular genetic formulation that somebody might make work. Can I get like intellectual property rights over that?
So in the federal government, you can apply for intellectual property rights for your seed. However, nobody to date has been able to demonstrate that there is a beneficial use, societal beneficial use, which is one of the triggers for intellectual property
In federal court.
in the federal systems. However, in the federal system, you cannot trademark.
Mhm.
So as you develop your product, you can't, as you market it and label it and things like that, you can't trademark any of that. So it's hard to go across state lines.
Sure.
However, at the state level, you can trademark. So we have all these kind of crazy rules to protect it, but at the end of the day, you can't really protect your seed that you've grown if you've cloned something or you've been able to take a genetics of the plant and get it the one that you want. It's very difficult to protect your brand and your particular seed. And seed is a very sought after now. And I did, as I've learned more about this, people want the flower, but people want the seed.
Okay, so let me just take a moment to say we're sort of winding down towards the end. If you have a question, you really have to put it into the Q&A function now, and then I will ask Mike about it. My next question is, we've been talking mostly about the grow side, but what about the distribution side? What rules, if any, can we discern might be coming for them? And then also there's a social equity piece, right? How does that work on either side?
Well, one of the things, and I'll get to that, but one of the things I want to make sure that we mention, when this first came out, I answered this question wrong. So I want to make sure that I answer this question correct this time. I'm familiar with PLA agreements on a lot of the project labor agreements. I'm very familiar with them on projects that I've worked on. What I'm less familiar with is labor peace agreements.
Okay.
And there is a local 338, Nikki Cateman is down there, but in the medical as well as the adult use marijuana, as well as, actually, I'm taking that back, adult use marijuana and definitely in the medical marijuana parts, you need to have an agreement with somebody who represents cannabis workers, the people in the industry. Right now, like I said, Nikki Cateman, local 338, I talked to her a couple of different times, and basically a labor peace agreement is, the job is not big enough, because we talked about retail and on-site consumption. The jobs aren't big enough to really push a lot of the heavy labor type of issues that are out there. But what they want to make sure is that the cannabis worker isn't mistreated or taken advantage of because he falls outside of a PLA. So they have the labor peace agreement.
Okay.
And those are really for retailers and on-site consumption type of places, small batch growers. But in New York, if you're growing, you really want to reach out to Nikki, because you need to have, before you can get your application approved for a license, you need to have either a PLA or an LPA in place. And it's written right in the statute.
Okay, so not optional.
Not optional.
And there's Nikki, is there anyone else who works on this?
I've only found Nikki, local
Yeah.
338 cannabis workers. I've not found others at this point. There might be other locals popping up, but as the industry grows, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I drifted off of your question.
Oh, so the question was, what's the sort of risk structure that's being set up for the retail side, right? And how does that interact with the social equity piece?
So the social equity piece, because we're seeing the big money come in first to the large scale growers, the social equity piece that's coming in is, it's the way that I can see it working out is the retail sales and the on-site consumption.
Mm-hmm.
Those licenses will really, in my opinion, be targeted more towards the social equity pieces.
Yes.
I think you can go across the board with everything, and they will try to do that with their mandate. But in the sense of cost, in the sense of opportunity, you can only have so many large scale growers.
Yes.
You can only have so many batch growers. That's where the money is. The tax is on the other side, on the retail side. But what to me is what's interesting is I can see very much the retail, the delivery, the waste permits, and the on-site consumption. I can see those licenses really filling that and trying to impact in those communities. Having the grow facilities, having been part of one, it's a little harder.
Okay, very interesting. Is there anything else you feel like people have to know before we leave this topic?
No, certainly give us a call if you're thinking about something specific. There's a lot to this. It's not simple. There is a lot to it. If you're sitting on the sidelines right now and you want to be within the social equity categories, if you fit into any one of those, I would figure out how to register for those. In New York State, we already have a significant backlog in MWBE application approvals. And so if you're coming in as an MWBE into that category, you want to get that started now because it's going to take some time to get those approvals. It's just a function of what we're doing here and how those get approved in the state. They're a significant backlog. We here as a firm have several that are backlogged for a couple of years now. So that takes a process. They'll probably deal with that in one way or another, but it's a process. That's probably the best advice right now that we can give. Just prepare for where you're going and learn. You want to grow. Don't think you could just get off the couch, plant a seed, and grow marijuana. It is incredibly complicated to grow. So that's my advice.
All right, Mike. Well, I think I speak for everyone watching at home now and also probably in the future when I say thank you so much for sharing this with us today. And I want to thank you people out there for attending the webinar. We are going to end now, and I hope you have a great day.